How does the food you eat contribute to your health? Do supplements help prevent disease? For the past 25 years, the Linus Pauling Institute has served as a world-renowned research center at Oregon State University. Our mission is to promote optimal health through cutting-edge nutrition research and trusted public outreach. We use a synergistic strategy, connecting several scientific fields to bring a better understanding to dietary components and the role that they play in obtaining optimal health. We provide that information to the world, allowing people everywhere to live longer, better lives. Welcome to the Linus Pauling Institute's webinar series.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry if that intro music did not play correctly, but welcome to the Linus Pauling Institute's webinar series. This is Galvanizing Your Health, Why You Need Zinc, a webinar by our own resident expert on the subject, Dr. Emily Ho, also known as the director of the Linus Pauling Institute. I am Alexander Michaels. I'm your moderator for this webinar this afternoon, or morning/afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. And I'm also the communications officer for the Institute, and I will be handling the Q&A session later today. It's my great pleasure to be here and bring you this final webinar of the Linus Pauling Institute's 2022 webinar series. We're already working on our webinar series for next year, so don't worry, we'll be back, and we'll probably start again in February with our Linus Pauling Day webinar, which we will be announcing soon. But today I'd like to focus on the webinar on zinc, and this is just going to go like many other webinars in our series. Dr. Ho will be coming on shortly, and she will talk for about 25 minutes, 30 minutes in her presentation, and then we're going to switch to a Q&A session, which will take up the remainder of the hour. We hope to finish around noon Pacific time, and any questions that we don't get to during that time, we'll just address in future publications like our research newsletter. I wanted to quickly, before I start bringing Dr. Ho on, and because the Q&A will come up relatively soon, if any point during Dr. Ho's presentation you do have a question, certainly put it into the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. I'll let you know that there are 850 people registered for today's webinar, and I think we received over 400 questions in advance. So that will limit the number of questions that we can get to today. Okay, so Emily, would you like to turn your camera on? As I already said, our speaker today is Dr. Emily Ho. Dr. Ho presented at the end of our webinar series last year and the year before. And so I don't think I need to go into a complete biography of her career and her history with the Institute. But I'll sum up a little bit. As you recall, Dr. Ho's research falls into two big buckets. One of them is the cruciferous vegetables bucket, and the other one is the galvanized metal bucket, the zinc bucket. And so today we're going to focus on her zinc work. Her interest in zinc started with Dr. Tammy Bray at the Ohio State University, if I remember that correctly. He was working with in diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is that right? And she then went to UC Berkeley as a postdoctoral trainee. At UC Berkeley, she trained under the legendary Dr. Bruce Ames at Corey, the Children's Hospital Oakland Research Institute. And it was in Dr. Ames' lab where she started to investigate zinc more carefully, and it's looking at its role in cancer. And I'm sure she looked at its role in DNA damage, because that's what Dr. Ames loved to do. She continued and expanded her work on cancer and immune function, and she joined the Linus Pauling Institute in 2003. I remember actually sitting in her job talk in 2003 as a graduate student, and being interested in the zinc angle especially. Almost 20 years later, Dr. Ho is one of the nation's leaders in zinc research. She's received an Outstanding Researcher in Vitamins and Minerals Award from the American Society of Nutrition, and has published over 100 peer-reviewed articles in this area, and continues to publish, as I was just looking at some of her articles from earlier this year. And in our latest newsletter, there will be an article from the Ho Lab on zinc. So thank you, Emily, for agreeing to talk to us today about zinc. And without further introduction, the floor is all yours. Oh, she can't unmute. There we go.
All right.
Now we can hear you now.
You hear me now?
Yep.
And see me now as well?
Yep. You're ready to go.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I'm really excited to share this time with you and talk to you a little bit about some of the research that we're doing, not only at the Linus Pauling Institute, but specifically in my lab as well. Let me see if I can get this to advance. So as you all know, at the Institute, all of our researchers, including myself, really strive to help discover and enable individuals and communities to tip the balance towards optimal health. I'm going to talk to you about some of my research specifically, and as Alex had mentioned, kind of the joke in my lab with my students is whether or not they're Team Broccoli or Team Zinc. Last year, I talked to you about some of the Team Broccoli work that we do, and today I'm going to talk to you about Team Zinc a bit more. So before we get kind of into things, let's talk about what is zinc. So zinc is an essential mineral or a metal. So it's an inorganic compound that you'll find on the periodic table. If you remember this from your chemistry high school classes. It's most similar to nutrients like copper, that's shown here, and hence there's some interactions with copper that I'll talk about. You'll also notice it's in this middle section of the periodic chart. This is a group of metals that are called transition elements. A lot of these transition elements, like iron, which is another essential nutrient, transition in that they give up or gain electrons. And zinc is a little bit unique in that it is a transition element in terms of where it fits on the periodic chart, but it doesn't transition. So zinc does not gain or accept electrons. It stays in a +2 state all the time, unlike copper and iron that transition between either a +1 or +2 or a +2 +3 state. And this unique chemistry of zinc really affords it some unique properties in terms of our human health. And in particular, because of its lack of transitioning, it really acts as a strong stabilizing factor within our bodies and within our cells. And the stability works in a bunch of different ways. So one of the stabilizing things, so again, the title of this talk is Galvanizing Your Health, and this is exactly what zinc does. It happens to, again, because of the stability, it's able to act as a pretty potent antioxidant. And the way that it does this is because of that lack of redox activity. So it's able to stabilize and help prevent things from getting oxidized. And that's exactly what this photo is showing in terms of galvanized steel. Basically, by layering zinc over iron, you prevent that iron from being oxidized. So in very simple terms, that's what zinc is also doing within our bodies, helping prevent our cellular macromolecules and our cells from oxidizing and rusting and ultimately losing function. The reach that zinc has in terms of function is multifactorial. Zinc is a part of over 300 different enzymes within the body. It's associated with an additional 1,000 different proteins and especially transcription factors. And zinc helps them do their job. So zinc is important in a whole host of systems within our bodies and within the cells. So at the cellular level, any cell that needs to divide or metabolize needs zinc. For cells to talk to each other, they need zinc. At the functional level, the systems that tend to need rapid growth or rapid cell metabolism tend to be the systems that rely more heavily on zinc. So things like our reproductive systems, in our brain and our nervous system, in our wound healing is another process that zinc is very important in. And I'm going to focus a little bit on, and if you were at my webinar, I guess 2 years ago, I focused quite a bit on the immune system, and I'm going to re-talk about that. And in particular, another system that zinc is very important is in terms of our cellular protection and our cellular repair mechanisms as well. So I'm going to go over that, but there's lots of reasons why we need zinc, but I'm going to focus a lot on these bottom two areas in particular for today. So first question is, how much zinc do we need? So currently the recommended dietary allowances, or the RDA for zinc for an adult, if you're male, it's about 11 milligrams. If you're female, it's a little bit less at 8 milligrams per day. Where do we get our zinc? We can get it from a lot of different foods. And we are going to test out, Alex, I don't know if you can help share a poll. You hopefully can see this.
Poll is up. People are answering.
So which foods have the most zinc? Just curious if what we know.
We got about 40% of the people answering so far. Still answers streaming in.
Just a quick test of your knowledge. All right, we'll give you the last few moments. Then I don't know, Alex, are you able to stop?
We're doing pretty good, actually. Almost 75% of everybody has responded.
Great.
Okay, we're going to call it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, they got it, Emily.
All right, you guys are on it. So foods that, okay, great. So yes, of this list, crab it was the highest. A lot of seafoods do have high amounts of zinc. The bottom line, I don't know, can you close that?
Yes.
All right, so it's moving again. Let me see, my slides are moving. So good sources of zinc. So one kind of general rule when it comes to zinc is that it tends to follow protein. So there's very little free zinc in our bodies, and that includes in our food sources as well. And where zinc often resides in cells are as part of these enzymes or proteins. So protein-rich foods do tend to have more zinc. Things like lean meats, seafoods, but also vegetarian sources. So from vegetarian sources or plant-based sources, the foods that tend to be more protein rich tend to have more zinc. One caution that you have, though, in terms of if, for example, you're a vegetarian, most of the plant-based sources that have quite a bit of zinc also tend to have another compound called phytate. This phytate, long chemical name is inositol triphosphate. It's a very negatively charged compound, so it tends to bind 2+ things like zinc. So it's estimated that, so even though these whole grain for example, nuts and legumes contain quite a bit of zinc, you will only absorb about a portion of it. So it's estimated that you need to increase your zinc intake by close to 50% to be able to absorb the same net amount because of that phytate. So if you're if you're a woman, for example, if you're aiming to get 8 milligrams of zinc, that you would actually need to consume 12 milligrams to get the net 8 if you're a vegetarian. In terms of highest amount of zinc, pictured here are oysters. Oysters almost have a log-fold higher amount of zinc than some other. So for example, beef, a serving of beef has about 6 milligrams of zinc, whereas a 3-ounce serving of oysters has close to 30 milligrams of zinc. So you get quite a bit just from a single serving of oysters if you're worried about your zinc. So why are we talking about zinc? I feel like zinc sometimes flies under the radar in terms of a nutrient that you should be thinking about, but you should be thinking about it. The World Health Organization estimates that zinc deficiency affects about 1/3 of the population. Developing countries are often the hardest hit, but even in developed countries like the US, zinc deficiency is an issue. It's estimated about 12% of the population does not consume the EAR for zinc. So that's the lower amount, not the RDA, not the 11 or 10 milligrams. So a significant portion of the population is not getting enough zinc. If you're over the age of 55, that number goes up to close to 40% that aren't consuming enough zinc. So I'll talk a little bit about older adults in a moment. And one of the bane of our existence, and one of the reasons why zinc often does kind of fly under the radar, is that we don't have a great test or marker that's either sensitive or reliable for human zinc deficiency. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But the bottom line is that the prevalence of zinc deficiencies is likely very much underreported because of this lack of a biomarker. It also causes a lot of confusion in terms of supplementation trials. So in a lot of the supplementation trials, there are a lot of yes, no, maybe answers. And a lot of that is because we don't have a good biomarker and we don't know if you take a zinc supplement, if you're actually repleting someone back to what they should be, or if they're already okay and supplementing, that has a very different response. And we literally don't know necessarily where we're starting with in a lot of these supplementation trials. So I'll talk about that later. So why do you need zinc? Let's talk a little bit about what happens when we become zinc deficient. So I mentioned that zinc is a potent antioxidant, and it is for many different reasons. And this is work that I actually started in Dr. Ames' lab, is just ask the question, when you take away zinc, what happens? And the bottom line is, when you take away zinc, lots of things start to go wrong. This is an assay for oxidants. And when this is in a culture system, when we fed the cells a low zinc diet through their media, we immediately saw that the zinc deficient cells had a lot more reactive oxygen species. This also results in increased damage to the cells. So what this assay is, it's nicknamed the comet assay because the comets show DNA damage. Basically, you're assessing strand breaks, and when you have lots of strand breaks, the cells start to look like this comet. And you can see here that the cells that are zinc deficient not only have lots of oxygen stress, but have lots of damage. So our cells get damaged all the time, but we also have repair mechanisms that help coordinate the response to deal with oxygen stress and damage as well. And one of those proteins that does this is this protein called P53. P53 is a transcription factor. You can see here that this is a Western blot, and the bigger blobs means that there's more of the protein, and that's the normal response. In response to damage, for example, P53 upregulates and it coordinates a whole host of responses to help deal with that damage. And it does that through transcription. So this is an example of the P53. The red dot is the zinc in it. And how P53 works, it needs to be able to bind to DNA and then tells the DNA to turn on and then turn on all the transcription and the proteins that are important in things like DNA repair. And what we found is despite seeing increased protein levels, so there's more of the protein, the P53 there, that it's not functioning properly. And that the P53, oh, looks like my gel is not there, isn't binding to the DNA. So it's being produced in response to the DNA, but it's not functioning properly. So this ends up being quite the double whammy in terms of DNA damage, which is one of the important factors in terms of cancer progression. Increased DNA damage is going to increase your cancer risk. So when your cells don't get enough zinc, again, what happens is you have increased oxidant stress, increases in DNA damage. That DNA damage should signal a whole host of other systems to help repair and deal with that damage. But in the context of zinc deficiency, those systems are also impaired. So you're creating a condition where not only are you creating more damage, but also the ability to deal and repair with that damage. So the net effect is a decrease in DNA repair, and the net effect is way more damage. Again, this is going to potentially increase your risk for cancer down the road. So again, we are susceptible to stresses all the time. So we want to ask the question, one, does this happen in vivo in terms of susceptibility to increased DNA damage? And what also happens if you add on additional oxidative stress? So we did a study in animals. We have here at OSU a very strong kinesiology department as well. And what we decided to do is look at the interaction between diet and exercise. So we took animals and we fed them either a zinc adequate or a marginally zinc deficient diet, which is the MZD as well. And then we also looked at the impact of exercise. So in this model, what we did was voluntary wheel running in terms of our potential oxidant source, oxidative stress source using exercise. I do want to note though, so in this model, again, it's voluntary wheel running where we put a wheel into the cages of the animals. Similar to people, in terms of rodents, there are couch potato rodents and also ultramarathon loving animals as well. And these Sprague-Dawley rats happen to be running lover animals. So I know, many of you at home may have your voluntary treadmill in your homes that you may or may not use. These animals love to run on their treadmills. So on average, so these wheels have wheel counts. These guys are running close to 5K each night. So, think little legs, 5K, they're running a lot. So this is a model of high intense, pretty vigorous exercise. The amount of oxidant stress that they are exposed to is fairly high. The other thing I want to mention is that my lab has done historically a lot of work in prostate cancer as well. And zinc does have a unique interaction in terms of the prostate. The prostate is actually one of the tissues that contains the highest amount of zinc, at least of the soft tissues. Bone is a tissue that contains more zinc, but of all the soft tissues, the prostate contains the highest amount. The prostate also has several different areas in it. And the area called the peripheral zone is the zinc accumulating region of the prostate. And not all the other regions of the prostate accumulate zinc. What's interesting is that the zinc accumulating section of the prostate is also typically where prostate cancer happens as well. And the last fact is we also know that as cancer develops, there seems to be a dose-dependent decrease in zinc levels in that region of the prostate. So the nastier the tumor, the lower the zinc level is. So this is just an example of the prostate. So again, there are several zones, and this peripheral zone is, again, the zone that tends to develop prostate cancer. And on the chart here, you can see, our blood plasma has about 15 nanomoles per gram. Other soft tissues are about 200. And you can see that peripheral zone has over 10 times the concentration of zinc in that. Again, this is the zone that prostate cancer tends to develop. And you can see it drops pretty significantly as cancer develops. So getting back to our study, what we found kind of really interestingly is this was not a prostate cancer study at all. We simply were looking at the interaction between exercise and zinc status. And one of the first things that we noticed is that the prostate was highly sensitive to loss of zinc when you're not consuming enough zinc. So these are zinc levels. So here's the plasma. On the left are the zinc adequate. On the right are the animals that receive the low zinc diet, and you can see in their plasma levels start to decrease. But what was interesting, of all the tissues, again, just feeding a low zinc diet, the prostate saw a significant loss, in particular in this dorsal lateral lobe. So in rats, the names of the zones are a little bit different, but this dorsal lateral lobe is equivalent to that peripheral zone. So again, that area that it tends to accumulate zinc, and it also seems to lose zinc very specifically when you're fed, when you're not eating enough. And here is another zone, the zinc, and you can see that the ventral lobe does not lose its zinc. You can also see there's quite a bit more zinc in that peripheral zone as well. So what is happening functionally? So we assessed oxidative damage in these animals as well. So here again is looking at that dorsal lateral lobe. That again is the prostate cancer susceptible lobe. And the bottom line is, so when I look at zinc adequate to zinc deficient, at least in the animals that are not exercising, there actually was not much change in DNA damage. Similarly, if I compare a zinc adequate animal sedentary versus exercise, there isn't much change. However, if I combine the two, we now start to see a pretty significant increase in DNA damage, saying that normally in just exercise, you're able to not have damage. Even with the stress of zinc deficiency by itself, you're able to potentially repair and deal with that damage. However, if you have both simultaneously, you override the system or you overwhelm the system, and now you're increasing DNA damage, possibly by limiting those DNA repair mechanisms. What's interesting, if I look at the ventral lobe, which again is the lobe that isn't losing the zinc in response to the low diet, but also is not the lobe that is susceptible to cancer, that we see no changes across the board. So deficiency or exercise alone did not change DNA damage, but however, a combination did as well, which ultimately says maintaining adequate zinc status, especially if you're exposed or stressed due to exercise or potentially any other stress that causes oxidation, that you really need to make sure that you are maintaining adequate zinc status. And this could have an impact on cancer risk. And I'll talk next about the other system that also has high susceptibility to damage are our immune cells. So what populations are going to be most susceptible to zinc deficiency? So I mentioned before, in the US and in many other countries, if you're over the age of 55, you tend to consume less zinc. So 40% of both men and women do not get enough zinc. Older adults do not get enough zinc in their diets. Another unique thing that we see is as you age, your ability to utilize zinc is not as efficient as a young person. So you tend to have lower zinc status, even if you are consuming potentially enough zinc due to changes potentially in absorption and or distribution. So you have very much, again, a double whammy in terms of susceptibility to zinc deficiency as you age. And what are the consequences? So we know that aging is associated with a compromised immune system, and it's possible that compromised immune system could be related to compromised zinc status as well. If I superimpose impact of zinc deficiency on the immune system with age-related dysfunction with the immune system, they're very, very, very similar in that you see things like increased susceptibility to infectious disease, reduced vaccine efficacy. So you have a blunting of some arms of the immune system, but we also have overactivity with both aging and zinc deficiency in terms of our inflammatory state. And you have increased chronic inflammation as well, both with zinc deficiency and age. We know that the immune system is highly complex in terms of multiple parts. There's our barrier function, our innate immunity, which is things like our neutrophils and our macrophages that help invade, engulf and destroy. And then we also have our acquired system, which are things like our T cells and our B cells that help produce systems to target foreign viruses and bacteria. And the bottom line is zinc is really needed for all of these functions. So we've done some studies in older animals as well. So this is a study where we took young, which are about 2-month-old animals, which are considered to be a young adult, versus almost 2-year-old mice, which is more like an over 65-year-old. And we found that the first thing is, despite giving these animals what we think is a zinc adequate diet, so this is the AIN 93M diet, that these animals still kind of look like they're zinc deficient. So their plasma zinc levels are falling, and they look like they're just deficient, even though we think we're giving them enough. We also see a marked increase in inflammation. So this is a marker called interleukin 6. That's a pro-inflammatory marker. And the older animals have significantly higher amounts of inflammation. What's interesting is that if we supplement zinc, that we're able to restore zinc levels in the older animals close to that of the young animals. But importantly, restoring the zinc levels also mitigated the inflammation. So we saw a really big change in terms of inflammatory status, a result of correcting the zinc levels. So that correcting the zinc levels also corrected the immune dysfunction and helped prevent inflammation. So hopefully by now I've convinced you that getting enough zinc is important. And as I talked about before, you would think that this would be a standard thing that our physicians would look for in terms of your status, since it's such a critical part of your immune function, cancer susceptibility, and many other systems. Unfortunately, we do not have a great biomarker for zinc deficiency. Currently, the test that your doctor will order if they are interested in zinc is a fasting plasma zinc level. And I'm going to show you some data from my lab, where we did a human study where we looked at modulating zinc status in this case, adult men. So the men came in. There was a kind of an acclimation period for almost 2 weeks where we put them on a zinc adequate diet containing that 11 milligrams. And then we put them on a low zinc diet, about 4 milligrams of zinc per day for about 6 weeks. And then after that time, we also did a repletion where we fed them back a little bit of a zinc supplement and also gave them an adequate amount of zinc and looked at the effects. And the first thing I want to show you is this is the plasma zinc levels. And what do you notice? They're pretty well all the same. So these are people for over a month are eating a low zinc diet. So we know they are at risk for zinc deficiency. Yet the biomarker that is currently used in the clinic doesn't change. So clearly, this is not a sensitive marker for zinc deficiency, and likely misses, if you're using this as a test, it's gonna miss a lot of potential cases of potential zinc deficiency. And the reason why that missing is a problem is when we look at functional changes. So even though the test that's used in the clinic says you're not zinc deficient, you are, and there are some things that are starting to go wrong. So in this case, we use that same COMET assay, and you can see starting in the green, this is the beginning of the depletion period, there is a steady increase in DNA damage throughout the study period. Good news, once we replete the individuals, we are able to reverse so the problem is absolutely reversible and can be easily rectified just by giving back enough zinc. The other thing that I want to point out, though, is this is the other thing that we saw at this baseline period, a significant drop in DNA damage. And the reason why I bring this up is we attempted to recruit people that were not zinc deficient. Unfortunately, what did we use as our screener is plasma zinc levels. So what we think is happening in this baseline period of study is that we likely had a lot of individuals that were at least marginally zinc deficient. And basically during that 2-week acclimation period, we were able to replete them and help fix some of their DNA damage. So there's a lot of new research in terms of trying to, including in my lab, trying to identify better biomarkers. But the bottom line is getting enough zinc is going to be highly important. Again, because there isn't a great test, it's really up to you to make sure that you're consuming enough zinc. So again, currently our recommendations, the RDA, if you're a man, 11 milligrams, if you're a woman, 8 milligrams. This is important for your immune system, but many other functions within in your body. You may, especially if you're an older adult, want to consider taking a zinc supplement. But there is a bit of a caution. You can get too much of a good thing. So zinc by itself is actually fairly non-toxic. However, if you consume too much zinc, it can interfere with other minerals, especially that copper that I told you is similar in terms of properties. And if you take too much zinc, you will limit your body's ability to absorb copper. And copper deficiency also has impacts on your immune system, oxidant stress, and that type of thing as well. So the current upper limit for zinc per day is 40 milligrams per day. So you may want to consider, if you do consider a zinc supplement, to make sure that you're not consuming over 40 milligrams per day to limit the interactions, especially with copper and with iron. So the bottom line is you need to make sure that you're getting adequate zinc daily. That's both through foods and with supplements. You can, again, take extra zinc as a supplement, but be careful in terms of your levels, that you, again, can get too much of a good thing and have problems with excess zinc as well. And to be mindful of that as well. The bottom line is, what we do at the Institute is to help you live better longer. And zinc is certainly one of the things that you should consider and take note of in terms of helping your overall health and healthy aging. Before I open up for questions, I do want to point out at the Institute, we have this fabulous resort, the Micronutrient Information Center. We have several articles on zinc itself. We also talk about zinc and some other immune fighting or boosting or achieving nutrients in these 2 articles here. And then we also have a more recent article in terms of other nutritional strategies to help your immune system if you're interested in that. Again, last time when I talked about zinc, I talked a little bit more in depth in terms of immunity as well. So if you want to check out that webinar, it's also on the website. So again, just encourage you to in this time, I've only able to kind of really do a brief overview if you want to dig in. Check out the Micronutrient Information Center. We also have newsletters. There will be a Zinc article in the next newsletter as well. And there's lots of other resources on our website for you to check out. So with that, we'll open up for Q&A.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Emily, for giving that presentation. Every time I hear you talk about zinc, I immediately want to run out and get some oysters somewhere. I know some people are probably thinking, but I love oysters. So that's one of my favorite ways to get zinc. So in a moment, we're going to move on to the Q&A section. I see that people are typing questions in and have been doing so since the beginning of the talk. And as I'm speaking, go ahead and add more questions to that Q&A section. We'll try to get to as many as we can. I wanted to mention, though, at this point that the Linus Pauling Institute complements some of these webinars with additional information that we put into our newsletter, the research newsletter. That's our recent edition of the newsletter is going to be coming out sometime this month. It's kind of on its way to printing at the moment, so you'll be getting it in your inboxes fairly soon in the next couple of weeks. But we usually take the extra questions that you didn't get answered in these webinars and get Emily's answers and put them into our newsletter. And sometimes we create extra materials related to the webinars. So look there for follow-ups, things that you didn't get answered today. And in our most recent newsletter, the one that's coming out soon, we actually have some Q&A from our previous webinar on vitamin E with Dr. Myriad Traver. So you can check that out when it comes out in your inbox or mailbox, depending on what you signed up for. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter, you can do so on our website, and we'll be sending out links for that as a follow-up to this webinar. If you appreciate the webinars, newsletters, or other information that we provide to the Institute, we ask that you please consider a donation to our research and outreach programs. These programs are primarily funded through donations or generous giving from our followers. So without your support, we wouldn't be able to bring you these programs that we do on a regular basis, and we'll continue to do in the coming year. So, lend us your support in any way that you can. And I'm going to put that link to giving just so everybody has it into the chat right now. But obviously, I will send it to you other ways as well as some of the links that Emily put in some of her slides, including directions to get to the Micronutrient Information Center, where we have a lot of our information on zinc and the immune system. Okay, switching gears, it's time for the Q&A. So some quick ground rules. The Linus Pauling Institute is not a medical institution, so we don't answer questions on personal medical health conditions. So we try to get very general in terms of the medical conditions, general information on health and nutrition, but we will obviously dig into some of the specifics around zinc. And if like I said a couple times already, if we don't get to your question today, we'll try to get to in future installments of our newsletter. So with that, I think the first question I want to ask you, Emily, is about, you talked about food sources of zinc. Is there any consideration about like different food sources and whether or not it's going to be an adequate source? I mean, meat tends to be a decent source, but what about, let's start with vegetarian diets. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, where is the best place for you to get your zinc?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I'd mentioned, the vegetarian sources of zinc, like things like lentils, seeds, they have 2 to 3 milligrams of zinc per serving. So that's usually a tablespoon, a couple tablespoons of those. But the issue is those foods also have what are called anti-nutrients in them, things like phytates. There's another compound, oxalates, that that bind up the zinc. So what happens there is when you consume those foods, a complex forms in your stomach and in your GI tract that limits, that makes it bigger. So now you can't absorb the zinc as well. And it's not a total block, but I think I mentioned it's estimated that you would need to increase your zinc, total zinc intake by about 50% to account for that block. And that's not something that you see, for example, on a food label in terms of your daily value. So if you're exclusively vegetarian, that you might want to, that one, you need to consume more zinc. But two, that again, for insurance, you might want to consider taking a multivitamin, multimineral that has zinc. The other thing that I want to point out, if you're looking at a multivitamin, multimineral, zinc is one that is often left off the table in terms of some multivitamin, multivitamin. It does have a adverse taste sometimes to some people. So definitely look at your supplement label in terms of zinc content. Just because it says it's a multimineral doesn't necessarily doesn't necessarily have zinc, or it could be a very low amount of zinc.
I definitely want to ask you some questions about the supplements, and there's a few that are in the chat and in our list right now. But staying with food, so the phytates or the other anti-nutrients that like oxalate, can you think of that as more like almost like a imperfect coating around the zinc that prevents some of it from getting absorbed and just passing through, or there's ways to handle those though in terms of food prep, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, so if the phytate or oxalate binds with the zinc, that's a covalent bond, so you can't break it. But there are strategies to help minimize the phytate. So there are enzymes, phytase enzymes, but cooking, some cooking preparations will help limit. So fermentation, for example, is something that will help break down the phytate. So the phytate content basically the phytate won't bind to the zinc as efficiently. But even if you cook it, you'll decrease it, but you won't totally get rid of it.
Okay. So eliminate some, limit the problem, but still there's probably an increased need for additional sources of zinc based on just
all about numbers.
Yeah, getting the right numbers. So I guess I'll transition there into the zinc biomarkers. Actually, a lot of people have asked about like, how do I know if I'm getting enough zinc? Because obviously the combination of the food sources you eat, there's some uncertainty of how much you're getting there. You've got, as you mentioned, the variation absorption. And so obviously people would turn to blood for measuring this, but that, as you said, isn't the best place to go. Is there any other indicators? I mean, we had a question in the chat about like white streaks on nails. Is that an indicator of zinc deficiency, or are there other ways that you can tell?
So for a lot of nutrients, the biomarker that you're going to try to use is measuring the nutrient in different things. People have looked at plasma, red blood cells. People have tried to look at hair and nail zinc as well. All of them seem to be not terribly sensitive. Hair and nail zinc. So if you become zinc deficient, your collagen synthesis and your just cell synthesis is depleted. So you get brittle nails. You can get those, like it was mentioned, those white streaks. You're fairly deficient though once those symptoms show. So it's not that is not an early. Ultimately, we want a biomarker to find things early before problems really start to happen. And if you see those defects in your nails or changes in your hair and nails, because those are not rapidly turning over systems, that largely means that you've probably been deficient or for a while.
Sure.
There's been a lot of work on the research side in terms of identifying better blood based biomarkers. So metallothioneine, which is a small molecular protein that's sensitive to zinc, has been postulated to be used. There's a paper by one of my collaborators, Janet King, that has been looking at metabolites, especially fatty acid metabolites that may be a better biomarker. The issue with those biomarkers is, one, there isn't standardization yet, so there isn't a number. You can see compared to someone who is getting zinc that the levels are different, but it's not like we have a target value.
Right, yeah.
And that's kind of where the research needs to go. In terms of something that people can do now, though, is getting a dietary assessment in terms of looking at their food intake, in terms of what they're normally eating, and getting an estimate of how much that is, and then adding on to that supplements perhaps is one way. It's kind of crude, but
yeah. And I was going to mention, when you talked about hair and nails, obviously that's a very non-specific deficiency symptom. So you can get white streaks in your nails for a variety of reasons, and strange things happening with your hair for multiple vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Yeah. So obviously, don't use that as a great indicator. When it comes to getting the RDA, though, I mean, is there some indication that maybe more than the RDA would be? I mean, especially, we've mentioned a couple times already about the anti-nutrients or the phytate. It could argue that, and with aging, as you get older, it could argue that maybe you want to get a little bit higher than the RDA. But do we have any idea of how much more, or is it just kind of a little bit of a hand waving?
There's definitely a little bit of hand waving. I'm certainly an advocate in terms of trying to increase the RDAs, especially for older adults.
Yeah.
Currently, the RDA for zinc is the same if you're 18 or if you're 90. And given the research that's out there, it suggests that as you age, especially getting in the last decades of your life, that you might need more because you're not going to be able to utilize as much. I think certainly, right now there's calcium and vitamin D are really the only nutrients that have age-specific RDAs. And I think there's other ones that, including zinc, that need to be considered. I still do think, though, that you have to be mindful, even if you want to increase. I do tell my mom to take a 20 to 25 level of zinc. But you can get 50, 100 milligram zinc supplements out there as well. And I would still advocate for staying below the 40 to 50 milligrams per day for the other nutrient interactions.
Okay, that's a great segue into supplements, because there's definitely a lot of questions about supplements and zinc supplements. Let's start with, let's talk about when's the best time to take your zinc supplement, because I know that, or what you should do if you have problems taking zinc. For example, I get stomach aches whenever I take a zinc supplement, and I've noticed that there are certain times I get stomach aches, certain times I don't. Certain supplements, I don't know if it's the forms, but we can talk about forms in just a moment. But, is there any tips in terms of if you get some reaction to taking zinc, or is there a best time to take your zinc?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a lot of the mineral supplements do have stomach GI issues as a potential side effect. Zinc is one of those supplements that you do want to make sure you take with food, that you take it with food, and that will sometimes help. I often recommend people to try to take their zinc supplement later in the day. So even if you take it with food first thing in the morning, you're still kind of have an empty stomach. So if you do it, more at your lunchtime or at your dinner time, you'll likely have something more postprandial in your stomach. If it's that first meal of the day, it just takes a while for everything to get down there, even though you are taking it with food.
So, taking it with food, then that brings up the question, and then not just the food itself, but other supplements. So is there any issues with mixing zinc with other mineral supplements? I think a lot of people ask about zinc and calcium, zinc and magnesium. CalMag Zinc is obviously a supplement that you see on the marketplace. Do you have to worry about mixing it with other minerals? Is there an issue there?
So in terms of their chemistry, there is potential competition. The way that zinc, gets into our bodies are multiple transporters. So there are zinc-specific transporters, and then there's these divalent metal transporters, and also amino acid transporters that zinc will get in. So if you are taking a lot of calcium or magnesium or other metals, there's a chance that you might have competition for that divalent metal transporter to get, so it might limit it. But to be honest, it's pretty minimal in terms of those interactions, because there are alternative transporters that are zinc specific that magnesium or calcium will not look at. Like I said, based on the chemistry, there's going to be some competition, but in terms of reality, if you're taking a calcium supplement, you'll limit zinc to a small degree, but if it's inconvenient, or if your supplement is just one that's formulated with calcium and zinc in it, you don't need to necessarily worry about it.
I see. Okay. So, one thing that I did find worked good for me was a CalMag Zinc supplement. I didn't get the stomach problems that I did with a zinc alone supplement. So it's basically, maybe less than perfect, but not clinically relevant differences when it comes to mixing.
Especially when you're taking it at a supplemental level.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the forms of zinc supplementation. There's obviously different products out there on the market. Do you have any idea of which ones are better, which ones are maybe, I think bioavailability tends to be the goal, but minimizing side effects is another one. So do you have not necessarily a recommendation, but just some guidelines?
So in general, at least in people, the evidence that the different forms of zinc, even food-based, differences in bioavailability is questionable, I guess. But with that said, so getting back to the food, so most of the zinc that's in food is complexed. There's very little free zinc anywhere in our biology. So in our food and our supplements, zinc is always stuck to something. How it's stuck to something may change both side effects and bioavailability. Again, it's a little bit up for debate how big of a difference it is. I mean, the studies that I've seen, it may be a 5% change. And so the ones, so I guess stepping back to supplemental forms, the most common forms you're going to see zinc complex to are salts. So zinc sulfate, zinc acetates, or other organic acids, zinc gluconate, and then there are the chelated forms that tend to be stuck to things like amino acids, small proteins, and that type of thing. In animal studies, so again, one way that zinc can get in is through piggybacking on amino acid transporters as well.
Oh, okay.
So there is, in animals at least, some evidence that the amino acid chelates may have increased bioavailability, but just because they are able to piggyback on another transport mechanism. Evidence in people is a little bit more questionable in terms of, and I think also some of the stomach side effects as well, because it's basically kind of piggybacking on regular protein, and metabolism maybe less as well. But the bottom line is, if you are going to take a zinc supplement, form rather than amount matters more than form.
Gotcha. Okay. Obviously, if you have any reaction to any particular form, you could try a different form to see if that deals with you better. But maybe taking it with food is the better approach, as you said. Copper then comes up very commonly when we're talking about zinc supplementation. And so you did mention that, taking high amounts of zinc does help does limit copper? Can you elaborate that on a little bit more? I mean, should we be taking copper with zinc if we're supplementing at least, or at what level do you start worrying about copper?
Yeah, and let me step back in terms of telling you kind of how that interaction happens. And it is at high levels, so at normal levels, RDA, for example, you won't have that same competition. When you start to get above that 40 to 50 milligrams of zinc, what happens is high amounts of zinc will induce or cause a protein called metallothionein to be upregulated in your GI tract. The metallothionein, similar to the phytates, binds up copper and zinc. So when you have lots of zinc, you'll make more of the protein, but you've got lots of zinc around. So it'll only bind up some. But if you don't have, but metallothionein will also bind copper. So if you have a little bit of copper around, it'll also suck up the copper. And similar to the phytates, it forms a new complex that will limit the ability of the copper to get absorbed. So if you're taking like a multivitamin that has not terribly high levels of zinc, you're not going to have this induction of this new protein that sucks up the copper. It's only when you get up to these higher levels of zinc that you'll cause this protein to be made in the gut, and it'll start to suck up the copper and make it less bioavailable. So there is some strategies, some supplements, some high dose zinc supplements do put copper in the formulation as well to kind of override this. Again, it's all a numbers game. If you increase the protein, it'll suck up X amount of copper, but if you have excess amount of it around, it won't suck it all up. So some will still get through.
And that in that regard, there's really no optimal ratio of zinc to copper. It's just getting some extra copper to make sure that you don't become.
Yeah. So I know in some formulations, so copper we need, so the zinc level that we need is just about like around 10 milligrams. Our copper needs are less than a milligram. So you don't need to have 11 milligrams of copper. You'd probably only need like 1 to 2 milligrams of copper to overcome that, to have enough to still get through if you have that excess.
So even eating some foods that are, provide extra copper, it would be, or being aware of the copper that you're taking wise, you don't necessarily have to take another supplement on top of that.
Right.
And we're almost or actually we are over time, unfortunately. So I wanted to mention though, before I finish up, that there have been a lot of questions about zinc and COVID, zinc and long COVID. And I will mention that, a lot of studies have not been done. There haven't been a lot of clinical trials on zinc and COVID. We still follow those with interest. Dr. Ho touched on some of these in her Think Zinc webinar that we will, of course, send to everybody if they want some more information. But Emily, do you want to finish up with maybe a comment about zinc and say, I mean, it's cold and flu season right now. Should we think about possibly getting some more zinc during this time of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I always advocate for making sure that you are getting enough zinc, and a lot of people aren't getting enough zinc in their regular diet. So taking, again, a multivitamin, multimineral with zinc, or a zinc supplement, but again, trying to make sure you don't get too much per day is going to be important. But definitely to think about zinc, especially in the cold and flu season, is something to consider, including maybe taking a supplement just as extra insurance, given the getting enough in your diet may be sometimes problematic.
So, nutritional support, as we've said several times, but not necessarily hammering that zinc in there to necessarily cause other problems that could erupt.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, a lot of the supplementation trials that have been ongoing for COVID, for flu, for cold, show some promise. But again, a lot of times we don't know if that supplement is restoring a deficiency or if it's actually supplemental above and beyond. And so far, the evidence is preventing a deficiency definitely has effects. Getting super amounts of zinc may do more harm.
So I think I'm going to have to close up there. I know there's some great questions still in the Q&A, and we're going to have to, I think, take this into our newsletter for follow-ups. So, I mean, obviously, if you have a question that didn't get addressed and you want to see it addressed, you can still email us, lpi@oregonstate.edu, and we'll get Emily's answers together and get it into our next edition of the newsletter, which will be coming out in this later the winter/spring edition. So I'd like to thank everyone for their attention and the great questions. This is one of the reasons we do things like this, to help you find the answers to nutrition questions and questions about vitamins, minerals, and other parts of our diet. And I'd like to give Emily one more chance to address everybody and just bring us to a close.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I literally could talk about zinc like for days and days and days. So if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're also working on our schedule for 2023. Mark on your calendars, Linus Pauling Day. It will be coming in February, and we'll likely have a webinar focused on vitamin C again as well. So take a note of that, and we'll have some communication at the start of the year. Alex mentioned our newsletter is also almost out the door as well, so be on the lookout for that. Again, if you like events like this and what we do at the Institute, Alex will pop up the link and the QR code for giving to the Institute as well. We really value the support of all of our followers to help us support the research and support events like this. Lastly, again, if you have any comments or questions, again, email us at lpi@oregonstate.edu. We'll do our best to answer all your questions. And then lastly, be sure to visit our website and our social media page. Stay healthy and stay well.